Hey everyone, welcome back. Today let's discuss brain fog, this feeling of slow, cloudy thinking, word search, poor recall, poor memory in general, lack of focus, lack of mental clarity, perhaps a feeling of cognitive fatigue, and even depending on what part of the brain is involved, you could have this sensation of incoordination. So as a clinician and also as a researcher, what I'm hoping to bring to you today is a balance of personal experience, clinical experience, and fact-checking across what the research literature shows us. There is no reason you should suffer from brain fog. There are lots of solutions. Welcome to Dr. Ruscio Radio, providing practical, science-based insights into health. We break through the bias and the noise to bring you simple, trustworthy information that matters. The model through which I think about brain fog, we discussed this in a prior video, I'm going to develop it a touch further here, has a few components to it. Nutritional. Do you have poor diet quality? Or perhaps you have poor absorption of the nutrition in your diet. So things that can be important like iron and B12 for cognition, you either aren't eating much of, or if you have poor gut health, poor absorption, you may not be assimilating a lot of those nutrients. So the first two items are nutrition and gut health. Hormones is also an important part. If you're an aging woman and you're going into menopause, then this can be a factor that's an easy win to improve cognition. Or if you're a younger woman with irregular cycles, PMS also might indicate that hormonal health could be implicated. Lifestyle. No discussion of brain fog would be complete if we didn't touch on the importance of exercise, for which it's been shown that being sedentary will literally lead your brain to shrink over time. Stress management, and there's some pretty easy techniques you can use to mitigate stress, and also sleep, hugely important. Another component to this would be neural or brain inflammation. And by addressing a lot of these factors, you will indirectly support and resolve neurological inflammation. But there are a couple supplements in particular that I've found benefit with, and there's some pretty good research showing can reduce brain inflammation. And then finally, infections. No discussion in my mind on brain fog would be complete if we didn't at least touch on how chronic and low-level infections in some cases can be leading to these plaguing symptoms like brain fog, but also perhaps fatigue and joint pain. So with that, let's jump in and talk about these really in no particular order. These are not in order of importance, but we'll start off with iron. Iron, as you probably know, is needed to make red blood cells. The red blood cells will carry oxygen and nutrients all over the body, including to the brain. Something that's less appreciated about iron is the fact that it's needed as a cofactor for synthesis of serotonin and dopamine. Dietary intake and absorption are two big factors here. Bear in mind also that those who are hypothyroid are at increased risk for iron malabsorption. We should start, logically, with asking, well, how do I know if I'm eating enough? And here's a list of the top 5 most iron-rich foods. Oysters or mussels, beef or beef liver, iron-fortified grains and cereals, and you might be someone who's not eating these, and that's fine, but just bear that not eating those foods is potentially thwarting dietary intake. Spinach that's cooked, and pistachios. What does the research show us regarding iron? Well, a 2021 study found that 80% of women with iron deficiency reported having brain fog. Okay, that's correlation. What about causation? A 2007 randomized control trial gave people, women specifically, who had low iron levels at baseline, either placebo or an iron supplement as 160 milligrams per day of ferrous sulfate iron for 4 months. They found that restoring ferritin, and ferritin is a blood marker that will give you probably the most sensitive and accurate assessment of iron status, getting the ferritin, simple blood test, back to normal, there was a 5 to 7-fold improvement in cognitive performance, leading these researchers to comment women who improved their ferritin status showed improvements in performance on attention, memory, and learning tasks. So Bear in mind that dietary iron intake is important. If you have chronic diarrhea, constipation, ulcers, let's say, any sort of gastrointestinal condition that may lead to malabsorption, then gut health will be important to resolve toward better assimilation of iron. And your dietary intake is important. And also, if you are insufficient, supplementing with iron is a pretty easy method to bring those levels up, in addition to improving your diet and improving your gut health. Keep in mind that there is such a thing as too much iron, and iron is not a vitamin that if you oversupplement, your body will excrete, like vitamin C or maybe vitamin B12. That's a water-soluble vitamin. So I would not go on iron without having your levels checked. And a simple iron panel that includes serum iron, blood iron, but also ferritin is a great place to start. By the way, if this has been helpful, please comment and subscribe. Now, while we are on the topic of vitamins, vitamin B12 is also a very important vitamin for brain health and brain fog. As you may know, vitamin B12 helps to create myelin. It's this protective and also conductive layering or coating around your neurons, and it speeds up the signal. B12 also antagonizes or lowers homocysteine, and homocysteine, when its levels are too high, can be toxic to the brain. Remember, just like with iron, what you eat and what you absorb are important, and people with hypothyroidism are at increased risk. Now, regarding research on vitamin B12, a 2020 study looking at individuals with what's known as mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, and also had either deficient or insufficient B12, reported increased levels of forgetfulness, lethargy, poor levels of focus, and also tingling sensations. Now, this is a key to look out for if you're someone who notices pins and needles, and it may be subtle. It may be, well, I notice I'm really quick if I sit in the wrong position for my leg to fall asleep, my arm to fall asleep. That doesn't guarantee vitamin B12 insufficiency, but it's a flag that might be present. After replacing vitamin B12 for 3 months, they saw an 84% improvement in cognitive function. And in terms of how you can integrate vitamin B12 rich foods into your diet, 1 serving of the following will meet your daily B12 requirements: beef, tuna, and salmon. And you can also supplement with anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 micrograms per day for 3 to 4 months. And some protocols use much higher than this, as high as maybe 10,000. So there's a lot of options for either dietary or supplemental ways to increase your levels of B12. You'll likely have a sense, is this helping me? Am I improving after about a month? So we've discussed gut health, and no topic on brain fog would be complete if we did not really double click on this topic. Starting off with a 2023 systematic review. So this summarized 10 clinical trials in older adults with cognitive decline. They gave them probiotics. Now, why probiotics? Well, there's many things you can do to improve your gut health. My position, based upon the research data, is that one of the best, simplest, safest, and most well-studied supplements you can use to improve your gut health would be probiotics. And what they found, again, when summarizing 10 randomized controlled trials, they found improved cognition in 9 out of 10 studies. And this included subdomains of memory, learning, verbal fluency, and attention. Also, mechanistically, they found increased levels of what's known as miracle grow for the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this led this group of researchers to conclude as follows. Most studies involving AD, Alzheimer's disease, MCI, mild cognitive impairment, or healthy adults showed cognitive improvements in subjects treated with probiotics for 12 to 14 weeks. So this is why I say, and my position is, you should not overlook and you should highly consider a probiotic if you're having brain fog. Now, regarding absorption, a 2021 systematic review summarizing 14 studies found that various nutrients could be better absorbed when using a probiotic. Quoting this paper, the intake of probiotics in healthy subjects may result in improvements of vitamin B12, folate, calcium, zinc, and iron status. And these people were not supplementing. They simply saw improvements in the absorption of what they were eating in their diet from using a supplemental probiotic. Now, to the question of what probiotic, this is something we get a lot of questions about. And I've shared this concept on the podcast before, but I think it's truly worth constant reiteration. Occam's razor or Occam's posit, the simplest solution is usually the best, holds true here amongst many other areas in healthcare. And what we've been doing, myself and our research team, over the past few years is monitoring closely what's being published and trying to come up with an all-purpose protocol that summarizes across different trials, those for IBS, irritable bowel, for inflammatory bowel disease, for cognition, for depression, for skin and atopic conditions, for inflammatory and autoimmune conditions. If we look and take a big picture view, what can we conclude in terms of a meta all-purpose protocol, hence adhering to Occam's razor's posit that the simplest solution is usually best? And this is the meta protocol. There are 3 types of probiotics: blends of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, and you can use these at a dose between 1 to 50 billion per day. Saccharomyces boulardii, which is a healthy fungus, at a dose of 10 to 15 billion per day. And a soil-based probiotic is the 3rd type, which can be used at a dose of 2 to 6 billion per day. And we have other materials if you want to take a deeper dive on that. The other point that I'll make is regarding the minimum duration. And we're trying to be very careful with the wording that we're using here. Minimum duration, meaning not maximum duration, but the minimum duration to assess efficacy, 2 to 3 months for any one of these 3 types of probiotics. Bear in mind that systematic review we discussed earlier, finding improvements in cognition in multiple domains of brain health, they were giving probiotics and recommended using probiotics for 3 to 6 months. So this is why we say the minimum duration to assess efficacy, totally being pragmatic and logical here. If a support, let's say probiotics, are helping, you'll likely have an indication a month in, but you may not see the pinnacle of improvement until 2 or 3 or maybe even longer. So look for an indication of improvement early on, about a month in, and then ride that wave, continue that protocol until you feel, and this is my thinking here, this necessarily hasn't been published, but it's a derivative of what's been published. Ride that wave until you plateau. You've been stable in that plateau for 1 to 2 months to make sure it wasn't a fluke, it wasn't a coincidence, and then try to wean off and find the minimal effective dose. So moving on to the next component here is sex hormones or steroid hormones. Why? Well, a 2018 review paper made the following remark. Several studies have found that hormone fluctuations are one of the key factors that lead to defects in cognitive function. We also know that brain fog-like symptoms may result from low testosterone in men or women, but it's probably more implicated in men, although you can make a case for both. And certainly estrogen and progesterone fluctuations can cause brain fog and mood lability in women. The first thing you should do to improve your hormonal health, my opinion here, is get healthier. Eat a healthy diet, improve your gut health, adhere to lifestyle practices that we know are going to improve your vitality. This should lead to healthier hormones. But there are some cases where direct support is needed. Without going into sort of an exhaustive list here are 2 things, one for men, one for women, that are simple and you should consider for optimizing hormones. Men, ashwagandha. 2022 randomized control trial, 50 men with low libido used ashwagandha at 600 milligrams per day for 2 months. They demonstrated increased testosterone and increased libido. Now, cognitive function wasn't assessed in this study, but this is just to make the point that if you feel hormones are implicated as a man in your brain fog, ashwagandha has been shown to increase testosterone levels and libido. For women, lots of options here. I tend to favor black cohosh because I've used for many years in our practice this supplement known as Estro Harmony. And a 2022 review paper did find that 40 to 160 milligrams of black cohosh per day for 3 to 6 months demonstrated a benefit or benefits for women's health, including hormones and hormone-mediated symptoms. Quoting this paper, therapeutic uses, this is for black cohosh, include pain associated with menstruation, relief of premenstrual symptoms, PMS, and relief of symptoms associated with menopause. Now, again, they didn't directly report on brain fog here, but knowing that one of the things that can happen with PMS and menopause is brain fog or low mood, I think this is a reasonable inference, and certainly I think it's safe to conclude that both of these supplements can improve male and female hormone levels and may very likely have a positive impact on cognition. No discussion on brain fog would be complete if we did not talk about sleep. Every facet that's been studied as it connects to sleep shows that whatever you're studying, whether it be neurocognitive decline, metabolic conditions, cancers, low mood, immune conditions, they all get worse with poor sleep and get better with healthy sleep. So certainly this includes cognition. Enter a 2023 observational study. Now, observational studies do have limitations, but this one was fairly large. And what they found when looking at nearly 30,000 adults was that sleeping less than 6 hours or more than 9 hours was associated with a decrease in brain volume and a decrease in cognitive function, whether it be memory, reaction time, or reasoning and logic. That's observational data. That's showing association. There's limitations in observational data. What about something interventional? This would give us more of a rationale for sleep. Will you improve cognitive function if you improve your sleep? The answer is yes. 2019 randomized control trial, albeit small, 22 healthy people who tended to be the evening or night owl chronotype. They took steps to improve their sleep hygiene. And we'll go over what this means in a moment. But as this group worked to improve their sleep hygiene, which includes, but it's not limited to, getting to bed a little bit earlier, after only 3 weeks of falling asleep and waking up 2 hours earlier, they had improved cognitive reaction time and improved depression and stress. It's really important to keep in mind that healthy sleep hygiene practices are paramount to overall health and definitely cognitive health. What do you do for sleep hygiene? The short list here is to go to bed and to wake up at the same time every day. Now, ideally, getting to bed somewhere between 10 and 12, maybe even better to say between 10 and 11, is probably best because our wake and sleep cycles should track with day-night, sun and dark rhythm. So if we go too far from that, if we go to bed too late, we actually do throw off the regenerative nature of sleep. So getting to bed at a reasonable time and doing so at the same time and also waking up at the same time is one component. Outdoor light exposure in the morning to sort of anchor the fact that it's now daytime. Correspondingly, low light in the evening. Avoiding caffeine after 1 to 2 p.m. and aiming for 6 or 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. Don't underestimate how important this is for optimal cognition. You cannot supplement your way out of not sleeping well. And if you're someone who's not sleeping well, there are lots of things that you can do, and we've discussed some of those therapeutics and causes in other videos. Okay, to bring in something that I have recently experimented with and seen benefit from, acetyl-l-carnitine. Why? Well, coming back to the concept of neural inflammation, acetyl-l-carnitine is a neuroprotective antioxidant, and it also supports brain energy metabolism. Now, what happened in my case, without going too into the details, and I might do a podcast on this at a later date, but I was using a skin cream at night that had caffeine in it. And for 6+ weeks, I was unable to fall asleep until 4 o'clock in the morning. This decimated me. It was awful. Now, I finally figured that out. And remember that you absorb about 60% of what you put on your skin. It varies in terms of the what, but certainly what you put on your skin, you absorb. And some people are more caffeine sensitive than others. And I know that although I'm okay with caffeine during the day, as bedtime approaches, it will definitely interfere with my sleep. I fixed the sleep, but I'm noticing in the wake of that, I'm still not feeling as sharp cognitively as I was accustomed to. And acetyl-l-carnitine led to some pretty clear benefits within 1 or 2 days. The main thing I noticed was more fluid speech. And in addition to that, I didn't have that wall that you'll sometimes see people hit maybe at 5 or 6 o'clock in the afternoon. They're not necessarily tired. They don't need a nap but it's just hard to think and it's hard to keep doing work tasks or things that require a decent cognitive effort. What does the research show us? A 2003 meta-analysis looking at 21 randomized control trials in over 1,400 patients who had either MCI, mild cognitive impairment, or early Alzheimer's were given placebo versus acetyl-l-carnitine. And they found improvements in attention and cognitive performance as well as improvements in memory. Now, the effect size here was small. It wasn't a huge effect, but nevertheless, there was a statistically significant improvement in these functions. Looking at a different trial, this time from 2016, 60 patients who were treated successfully for hypothyroid, but were still having some fatigue, were given either placebo or in this case, L-carnitine at 990 milligrams per day. And after 3 months, they reported a decrease in mental fatigue in 50% of the subjects. Now, the one thing about L-carnitine that gives me a little bit of pause is while the L-carnitine is better to a minimal extent, I think the effect here is probably negligible. For metabolism, it can also cause diarrhea, which is why I favor acetyl-l-carnitine. It's more targeted toward brain health, antioxidant function, and it does not have the side effect of diarrhea. My recommendation, also borrowing from this meta-analysis and their findings, would be acetyl-l-carnitine at a dose of 1,000 to 2,000 milligrams per day for 3 to 6 months. Most acetyl-l-carnitines are going to be 500 milligrams per capsule. Exercise. If you're not exercising, you need to. Anything is better than nothing, but it's been fairly compellingly demonstrated that if you don't exercise, your brain will shrink over time. And this is because when you do exercise, you release, amongst other things, this BDNF, this brain-derived neurotrophic factor called Miracle-Gro for the brain. You also have increased brain circulation and increased oxygen delivery to the brain. What does the research show? Not that I think you need to be convinced, but a 2011 randomized control trial looking at sedentary, so non-exercising adults. They were given aerobic exercise for 1 year. And by the way, similar findings have been shown for weight training. This is just one study. After 1 year, they found there was less shrinkage of the brain over time, improvements in memory, and improvements in brain-derived neurotrophic factor. In fact, this diagram comes from the study. You have 2 lines representing each group of people. At baseline, you see the volume of the hippocampus, a center in the brain that regulates fear and learning and conversion of short-term to long-term memory. At baseline, the volume of the brain area is the same. And then at a year, what you see is those who are exercising have improvements in the size of that area of the brain, and those who maintained a sedentary lifestyle had a shrinkage of the area of the brain. And after a year, the delta is significant in between the two. This is why this research group concluded our results demonstrate that the size of the hippocampus is modifiable in late adulthood and that moderate intensity aerobic exercise is effective at reversing volume loss. Now remember, similar results have been documented for weight training. This is just one study of a few, but I thought it was noteworthy. The exercise recommendations here, again, bearing in mind that anything is better than nothing, we're taking from a 2023 umbrella meta-analysis that was looking for exercise improvements in depression and anxiety. So not necessarily for brain fog per se, but I think as close of a domain that we have good research to pull from. Just a quote, and then I'll give you the specifics. All physical activity modes were beneficial, including aerobic, resistance, mixed mode, exercise, and yoga. So the basic routine here would be aiming 4 to 5 times per week, 30 to 60 minutes, having a blend of aerobic and resistance. Doesn't have to be both in one session. What I do is weights and resistance one day and then aerobic the next day, and I oscillate across the two. The intensity has to be medium to high intensity. So medium would be brisk walking, light jogging, hiking. High would be running, cycling, or HIIT training. And you need both. Occasionally, we'll see people in our consulting practice who are only doing low-level activity. Again, which is better than nothing. But if you're only walking or stretching or doing mobility work, you're not going to get some of the benefits for the brain, and therefore for brain fog, that you can only obtain from higher intensity exercise. Obvious caveats here apply. Be careful not to go from being sedentary to, well, I'm going to sprint or do heavy weight training or what have you. Work your way up. Progressive conditioning is a key to success, but don't forget about the importance of having an aim of integrating some high intensity exercise into your routine. Alrighty, now if you are exercising, one thing that can help with recovery is adequate protein intake. Looking at a 2022 observational study looking at over 77,000 subjects in a 20-year follow-up, so a pretty impressive data point, 77,000 people tracked for 20 years, they found that increased protein intake decreased the likelihood you would have cognitive decline. They found that the optimal intake was roughly 20% of total calories. So to simplify this, if you're eating 2,000 calories per day, maybe most women, that's 100 grams of protein per day. And if you're eating a 3,000 calorie diet, that's perhaps most men, you're looking at 150 grams of protein per day. Now in this study, they did control for age and for caloric intake. So while observational studies have limitations, controlling can reduce some of those confounders. And while this is not an exhaustive list of variables to control for, they did a decent job of at least making sure they're controlling for age and for caloric intake. And this leads me to a few simple recommendations regarding getting an adequate protein. 30 to 50 grams of protein per meal, I think, is a simple and effective target that you can have for your diet. And here's a list of per serving size, what you get regarding protein. So 3 ounces of chicken, 27 grams of protein. 1 scoop of whey protein, 25 grams of protein. A half a cup of Greek yogurt, 18 grams of protein. Our Evolution bar, 18 grams of protein. I have 1 or 2 of these per day. A 3-ounce piece of salmon, 17 grams of protein. 3 ounces of beef, 15 grams. 2 large eggs, 12 grams of protein. And half a cup of tofu, 10 grams. So it's not difficult to get an adequate dietary protein, but it is important for brain health. And also as we age, we tend to become what's known as anabolic resistant, meaning it's harder for us to build muscle. And therefore our protein intake is more important as we age, because we also know that there's a direct correlation between death from any cause, or what's known as all-cause mortality, and the strength and size of your muscles. It's not to say you're trying to become huge, but you want to make sure to offset the natural decline in muscle strength and mass as you age, and adequate dietary protein is one great way to do that, in addition to the cognitive benefits that we just covered. Okay, let's talk about Shinrin-yoku. No, I did not sneeze. This is known as forest bathing. We've talked many a time on the podcast in the past how beneficial spending time in nature is. A 2023 review paper commented as follows: stressful life factors can act as a contributing factor to brain fog. For example, financial, familial, or work stress can cause rumination, that's sort of like thinking and thinking and thinking, and depressive symptoms that affect cognitive function. So we know that stress is bad for your brain. And we know that part of what happens is stress leads to an overactivation of the limbic system, and one area in particular in the limbic system, the amygdala. Here's why that all matters and how it ties back to time in nature. A 2022 study took 63 otherwise healthy subjects, scanned their brains in a functional MRI while looking at scary faces, then had them go for a walk either in a city or in a naturescape, got back in the functional MRI, looked at the scary faces again, and rescanned the brains. What they found was that after the walk in nature, there was a significant reduction in the level of activation of the amygdala, which is what you want. You don't want a highly active amygdala. If you're stressed, anxious, fearful, have poor memory, this usually equates to an overactive amygdala. And if you're relaxed and poised and otherwise healthy, this correlates with a lower or normal level of the amygdala activation. And along with, in this study, the decreased activation of the amygdala, they found improved attention and enjoyment. In another study, similarly, they found, quoting here, We found evidence for associations between nature exposure and improved cognitive function, brain activity, blood pressure, mental health, physical activity, and sleep. Exposure to outdoor environments may reduce the negative effects of stress. So the reason why we want to spend time in nature is presuming that, like anyone else, you have some stressors in your life. And so what can you do to mitigate or buffer those stressors? A great thing you can do is go for a walk in nature. And by the way, the naturescape doesn't matter. A very interesting and I think timely study from late 2023 found that it wouldn't matter if it was forest, lake, ocean, woods, parks. There was benefit with any of these naturescapes. And so the recommendation would be get 2 hours or more per week in nature. And this is associated with improved brain health, but even living near forests and oceans, living near naturescapes, has been associated with a reduction of death from any cause. So this blue zone and green zone hypothesis, as it's known, is something that we really want to take note of. And as best you can, try to get time in nature. We have discussed diet and trying to make sure that we absorb nutrients from our diet, but also that we have a diet that's adequate in vitamin B12, iron, and protein. One good diet to achieve this, not to say it's the only diet, but one that I like, is the paleo diet, because this will have adequate protein in most cases, iron, B12, but also polyphenols. These are antioxidant compounds in fruits and vegetables that will reduce brain fog or improve cognitive function, and have also been shown to reduce leaky gut. And so this diagram gives you a nice overview of the paleo diet. You're going to have protein, healthy fats, fruits, and vegetables. Really simple sort of dietary template. You could also insert into here a Mediterranean diet. You're going to have a slightly different balance, but you'll hit a similar endpoint. And just one study here looking at the paleo diet, a 2017 randomized control trial, 30 patients with diabetes were given no intervention or the paleo diet plus exercise. And they found a 6% increase in volume of the hippocampus in those following the paleo diet. Now, here's an important point. This 6% improvement in the hippocampal volume, this brain area that's responsible for memory and conversion of short-term to long-term memory, this improved irrespective of exercise. So it's important to keep that in mind. Now, to be careful, it could also be these improvements, these brain health improvements could have occurred due to the fact that these people presumably were eating less and getting to a better sort of caloric balance and lost weight and had improvements in their insulin. A diet plan that's going to be replete with protein, vitamin B12, iron, and polyphenols is a good target. One, not the only one, would be a paleo diet for you to consider. Okay, the final component here, I would truly be remiss if we did not at least briefly touch on, is addressing chronic infections. A part of me, the scrupulous scientist inside of me, hears that and says, quackery BS, right? Because what sometimes happens in healthcare is these very vague syndromes are blamed for everything, and they become sort of this ethereal boogeyman that is the source of all your problems. There's a balance here to be struck. I don't think everyone has chronic infections, and I don't think that all or even most symptoms, like brain fog, are caused by chronic infections. However, there's likely a subset of people for whom this is at play. Bear in mind that everything we've talked about thus far will make you and your immune system healthier, and therefore should help your body naturally on its own be able to fight and overcome some sort of chronic infection. Here's a few data points. Long COVID, 1/3 of these patients experience brain fog. That being said, I have some major reservations with some of the long COVID research. Full disclosure, I have not been following this data very closely, but I have been following some of Vinaya Prasad's work, who is a hematology oncology doctor at Stanford, who seems very well reasoned. And his perspective, which I find logical, is a lot of the associations with long COVID are confounded. Now, that's not to diminish anyone's experience who may be noticing long COVID or long COVID-like symptoms. But I just want to be careful to share my perspective, which is I'm open, but I'm also a little bit scrupulous. And I'm scrupulous with your best intentions in mind because I want to be careful that we don't create a thing to blame everything on and forget about what might be some really actionable things you can do to improve your health, like we've outlined in this video, including brain fog. Epstein-Barr virus is another one that we should just briefly mention. Now, again, a thing here I've struggled with is if you test people for Epstein-Barr virus, almost everyone is going to have some evidence of that on their blood work. And this is because 90% of people usually have Epstein-Barr virus in their system. It's kind of a normal resident, if you will. How do we know if that virus has gone from dormant, like chickenpox, right? If you've had chickenpox, that virus, or you've been vaccinated against it, that virus is going to be active at one point, and then your immune system is going to be able to suppress it and hold it in a dormant state. So how do we know if someone has reactivation of a virus that your body normally keeps dormant? Well, for chickenpox, you'd have shingles, right? So you'll have a rash, you'll have tingling, pain. Epstein-Barr virus, it's a little less obvious in terms of there's not great agreement in how we look at blood tests and adjudicate, well, this pattern or level indicates reactivation and this pattern or level does not. There's really not agreement, but you can take stock of your symptoms. Now, check out this data point. We know that Epstein-Barr virus antibodies will increase following stressful events. Now, this includes academic testing in a couple studies and the stressors of military training in a few other studies. There's at least a somewhat, admittedly, speculative case that if someone's been under a lot of stress, that stress may have led to reactivation of Epstein-Barr virus. And I'm actually empathetic to this because this is part of the storm that I was in after that 6-ish weeks of not being able to fall asleep until 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm fairly confident there was also a layer of viral reactivation that was leading to some of my symptoms, which included brain fog, but there was others. Part of where my perspective comes from on this, and I want to say thank you to Dr. Jenny Tufankian, who was on the podcast a couple years back, and we discussed chronic viruses. And she had mentioned that olive leaf and cemento, aka cat's claw, can be effective antivirals. Now, this is an area where there's not much study, probably because there's not much funding, and we're limited to animal and in vitro data. But nevertheless, for either one of these compounds, olive leaf or cemento, there are data demonstrating antiviral and sort of immunomodulatory impacts. Now, as a quick juxtaposition, I also tried valacyclovir, which is a antiviral that may help with Epstein-Barr. They used it for shingles, they used it for herpes, and I had fatigue and joint pain from that medication. So this is why my preference, albeit partially biased by my own personal experience, admittedly, is to look at the natural compounds. So what happened when I took the olive leaf and the cemento? Within 4 days, my energy was noticeably better. Now hang on, before you run out and just say, well, I'm fatigued, let me try olive leaf and cemento, you want to think about your situation. If you're not exercising and you're eating a poor diet and you have chronic bloating and abdominal pain, then this is probably not the protocol for you. If you've had a high level of stress or poor sleep, then this might be something to consider. And if you want to do a deeper dive on that, search my name and Jenny Tufankian, or just search my name and viruses, and you should be able to find that podcast with the show notes, with a short list of the symptoms that would indicate you have a viral reactivation. PEA in lutein is a supplement that may be helpful in long COVID. 2022 clinical trial, 69 long COVID patients were given this supplement and they saw a decrease in brain fog severity, leading these researchers to comment as follows: the effects of PEA and lutein likely stem from reduced central neuroinflammation. And the dose they used was PEA, 700 milligrams per day, and luteolin, 70 milligrams per day. So there you have some options for post-COVID brain fog and a natural protocol if you've had a lot of stress and you suspect something like Epstein-Barr virus might be reactivated with due cautions due to the fact that there's a little bit of speculation in that protocol. Okay, so to sort of close everything out, as I said before, if you have brain fog, do not suffer with it any longer. There are lots of things you can do as someone who's been there twice. So the labored thinking, the feeling of incoordination, slurred speech, poor memory, unable to remember names, facts, figures, solve problems, these are super unpleasant. They're an indication that something is wrong, and there are lots of things that you can do. As we discussed, nutritional, B12, iron, protein, polyphenols, perhaps a paleo diet. Gut health, one of the easiest things you can do is probiotics. Hormonal health, male and female, ashwagandha and black cohosh. Lifestyle, exercise, sleep, and Shinrin Yoku or time in nature. Neuroinflammation, acetyl-l-carnitine. Infections, not limited to, but olive leaf, cat's claw, and PEA luteolin. I struggle with this one. In any case, work the problem, okay? Take this one step at a time. Take stock of who you are and what you have going on in your life. Is stress, exercise, sleep, are these lifestyle variables the ones that seem to be the most out of place? Or are you doing all those things, but you're recovering from a bout of stress? And perhaps antioxidants would be helpful. Might you have tingling, or might you have had anemia previously? Are you having low libido or PMS? All right, so bear all of these things in mind, or some obvious things like indigestion, reflux, abdominal pain, constipation, diarrhea. Don't do all these things at once. And if you need help, myself and our clinical team would be more than happy to walk you through how to personalize some of these to your life and your situation. But again, do not suffer with brain fog. It is very able to be remedied and certainly not something you should suffer with one more day than you have to. All right, this is Dr. Ruscio. Hope this helps.